let's return to the horrific events regarding Wayne Couzens, who's being sentenced for the murder of Sarah Everard. And we never had a trial, obviously, when he pleaded guilty to her abduction, rape and murder back on March the 3rd. Absolutely shocking case, simply for the shocking crime that took place, but even more shocking that it was a serving police officer who was responsible. Well, the family of Sarah Everard have spoken in court in the Old Bailey at the sentencing hearing, and later today we're going to hear the mitigating evidence, if there is any, for the defence before Wayne Couzens is sentenced, many expecting him to get a whole life tariff for that crime. Let's talk about this with Professor David Wilson. He's Emeritus Professor of Criminology at Birmingham City University. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia. Lovely to talk to you again.
Yeah, I wish it was under nicer circumstances, David. But I mean, look, most of us, 99% of completely normal people in the world who'd never dream of any such crime we're utterly horrified, but also utterly flummoxed as to the motivation of somebody who could commit this crime. But even more so that it is someone who was a serving police officer, able to use, as it emerged yesterday, his status as a police officer in a hire car, not a police car, but to show his warrant card, to use his police issued handcuffs to actually basically pretend to arrest Sarah Everard. She was in breach of lockdown conditions, of course, on that night. She was walking back from a friend's house where she'd had dinner, which at that time was not allowed, absurdly in my view. But he was able to use that status to abduct her and to then later rape and murder her. What does motivate men like this?
And one other detail in terms of that very comprehensive introduction that you gave. Remember, he also strangles her using his police belt. Both the handcuffs and the belt are quite fetishized, I think. You're not going to be surprised if I say that what's motivating him are his sexual interests and his sexual fantasies, fantasies about having power and control. We should remember this was a man who was also jokingly nicknamed rapist by his peers, and had also, in the months preceding Sarah Everard's murder, had been caught indecently exposing himself. Behaviours which I've often said, indeed, we've spoken about this on your programme before, behaviours which I believe should be taken far more seriously as indicators of future serious sexual assault, as opposed to being trivialised. Yeah. But what was motivating him is quite clearly a desire for power and control, and his sexual fantasies, which he wanted to make real.
I mean, you touched on that nickname, jokingly or not, the rapist. Apparently he made women feel uncomfortable that he worked with. He clearly had behaved or expressed himself in a way that made people uncomfortable. The fact that someone could have a nickname like that, even allowing for, as a guest editor today was saying, about the gallows humour of police officers. And we know some of the jokes, the sort of the tasteless jokes that people who work in the front line, whether it's, as surgeons or police officers in the army, often may not be to the taste of people sitting at home in a desk job, but actually that's often a coping mechanism. But the concerns over this man and his safety around women had been raised, not just once, more than that. The nickname is a very big giveaway that people were sort of concerned at the very least about him, and yet nothing was done. How damaging do you think this is? I mean, you as a criminologist, you've worked with the police many times, for this man to have been not just a former police officer, but a serving police officer.
Well, it's incredibly damaging, and we've got to, and I know the police are looking at how he was able to become a serving police officer, the kind of vetting that was done to allow him into the Metropolitan Police. Remember, this was somebody who was also given access to firearms. He was on the diplomatic squad. He was armed in relation to those duties.
And there's a lot more vetting for those jobs. I mean, psychological vetting that goes on.
There absolutely is, and I've actually done part of the training for that particular group in the past. So I mean, there are real questions to be asked here. But one of the things, Julia, that we should also concentrate on is, because of some of the behaviours that we see Couzens engaged in, and the fact that he was 48 when he was engaging in these behaviours. These behaviours were very practiced, very controlled. Yeah. Very skilled. He did things both pre and post-mortem that suggested to me that this would not be the first time he had behaved in this way. And
Yeah.
therefore, there are things that I think that have got to be looked at in relation to a timeline that Couzens can be placed in that may link him to other kinds of crimes of this kind.
That's the thing. I mean, the clearly the planning. I mean, again, I thought not a very good police officer. If he hired a car in his own name, he doesn't realise there's CCTV footage over him. I mean, he was this Clapham Common, for goodness sake. But so part of me was thinking, well, did he want to get caught because he didn't seem to take any of these measures? But then ordering on Amazon, some of the items he used to dispose of her body. On one level, it almost seems like a sort of, hi, look at me. Can someone notice that I've done this? And yet there's also an element where he's obviously thought this through. And what are the odds this is, as you say, what are the odds this is the first time he's done this? He's just got away with it previously.
I often find that I'm asked that question, especially about people who are serial offenders. Did they want to be caught? And in my experience, they don't want to be caught. It is simply by the stage that they are caught, they are operating in a parallel universe so that they don't really understand that their behavior is so aberrant and so obviously aberrant that they are going to draw attention to themselves and eventually be arrested. Yeah. They are simply working in a parallel universe by that stage where they see themselves as all-powerful and as omnipotent, and therefore they don't expect to be caught. It's not that they want to be caught.
They just think they're perhaps too clever. Just finally, I mean, the sort of people who want to join to be police officers. I've mentioned on the show before, I've got some really, really good friends who are detectives, and ordinary rank and file police officers. And I know that their motivations, they just think they're just incredibly good people. And we can't go on a night out with them and getting involved, trying to save someone, doing this or doing that. They feel they're incredibly public spirited. And I think that's the vast majority of police officers that I've come across. But we've all, have we not, come across police officers who are loving the power, who are egomaniacs, and who are loving every moment of their shiny buttons on their uniform and their authority. Do we need to be making sure that people who are perhaps just into power are not put in positions where they do have power over other people, and in this circumstance able to use that power for such a horrible thing to do?
Like you, first of all, before answering your substantive question directly, like you, I have many friends who are serving police officers, and as you indicated, I still do quite a lot of work with the police, and I know that all of those police officers are absolutely devastated by the behaviour of Couzens and the breach of trust that creates between themselves and members of the public. And the answer to your question is, of course we have to think very carefully about who becomes a police officer. And some police officers just don't get it. If you think about the vast majority of police officers, they are white, heterosexual men. And therefore, it does imply that we've got to think about a broader pool of people, gender in terms of ethnicity, in terms of sexualities, who start policing our streets. But again, that would go back to, there are some real failings here that have to be investigated in terms of how Couzens was able to get through what should have been a pretty strict vetting procedure.
Absolutely. Professor David Wilson, always so good to talk to you, sir, Emeritus Professor of Criminology. Thank you very much indeed.